They came for me on the morning of my promotion ceremony. I remember the small details with a clarity that feels surgical now, as though my mind knew to record everything in those final moments of my old life. The recycled air aboard the adjudicator tasted faintly of ozone that morning, sharper than usual, and I had attributed it to the engineering crews running diagnostics on the ventilation systems in preparation for Admiral Constantine's scheduled inspection. My dress uniform hung pressed and perfect in my quarters, the new rank insignia sitting in their case on my desk, Lieutenant Commander's squares that I had earned through 6 years of exemplary service in Imperial Naval Communications. I had shaved twice to ensure smoothness. I had polished my boots until I could see my own reflection in the black leather. A face I thought I recognized. A face that still believed in the order of things. The door chime sounded at 7:05, 13 minutes before I was scheduled to report to the officers' mess for the pre-ceremony briefing. I assumed it was Ensign Veers, my adjutant, arriving early with some minor crisis involving the seating arrangements or the holographic display calibrations. Veers was always early. Veers was always worried about something. I found it endearing, in the way one finds eager subordinates endearing when one is about to be promoted and feeling generous about the universe. I opened the door and found 2 men in gray-green uniforms standing in the corridor, their faces arranged in expressions of professional neutrality that I would come to know as the ISB's default setting. They were not armed, visibly, which I noted as strange at the time. Security personnel always carried sidearms aboard Imperial vessels. But I did not yet understand that the Imperial Security Bureau did not need weapons to destroy you. Their weapons were words. Their weapons were forms. Their weapons were the vast machinery of Imperial bureaucracy itself, grinding forward with the inevitability of a Star Destroyer's engines. "Lieutenant Cassius Morn?" the taller one asked. He had a thin scar above his left eyebrow, barely visible against his pale skin, and his eyes were the color of Durasteel bulkheads. "Yes," I said. "Can I help you?" "You can come with us," the shorter one said. He was already holding a datapad. Stylus poised over its surface, and I watched him make a small notation as he spoke. I would later learn that ISB agents recorded everything, every word, every hesitation, every flicker of emotion across a subject's face. They were trained to observe the way a predator observes prey, cataloging weaknesses, mapping vulnerabilities, building a profile that would be used to take you apart, piece by piece. "I'm afraid there's been some confusion," I said, still operating under the assumption that this was a mistake, that reasonable conversation could resolve whatever administrative error had brought them to my door. "I have my promotion ceremony in less than an hour. If there's a matter requiring my attention, perhaps we could schedule—" "This is not a request, Lieutenant." The taller one stepped forward, and I noticed for the first time the subtle way his weight shifted, the coiled readiness in his posture. He was not threatening me, not exactly, but his body was making a statement that his words had not. Resistance would be met. Resistance would be noted. Resistance would become part of my file. I did not resist. I stepped into the corridor in my duty uniform, leaving behind my dress uniform, my promotion insignia, my carefully polished boots. I left behind the person I had been when I woke up that morning, though I did not know it yet. I still believed that this was temporary, that I would return to my quarters within hours, perhaps with an apology from some embarrassed ISB functionary who had confused my identification number with someone else's. These things happened. The Empire was vast. Errors occurred. They did not happen. They did not occur. The ISB does not make errors. The walk to the detention level took 11 minutes. I counted my steps, 473, because counting gave me something to focus on besides the growing knot of ice forming in my stomach. We passed 3 security checkpoints, and at each one, the guards looked at me with expressions I could not read. Were they curious? Pitying? Afraid? I searched their faces for some sign of what was happening, some indication of what I had done, and found nothing but the blank compliance that the Empire cultivated in its servants. They had been trained not to see. They had been trained not to ask. They had been trained to forget the faces that passed through these corridors, because remembering was dangerous. Remembering meant involvement. Involvement meant risk. I was beginning to understand that I had become a risk. The detention level of the adjudicator was not designed for extended incarceration. We were a communications vessel, not a prison ship. But the ISB maintained a small suite of holding cells for administrative processing. A phrase that I would learn encompassed everything from routine questioning to interrogation techniques that left subjects begging for death. The cell they placed me in was 3 meters by 3 meters, with a metal sleeping platform bolted to one wall and a refresher unit in the corner that offered no privacy whatsoever. The lights were fixed at a brightness that made my eyes water, and there were no controls to adjust them. The temperature hovered at the edge of uncomfortable cold, enough to make me shiver in my uniform, but not enough to claim actual suffering. Everything about the space was calculated. Everything was designed to remind me that I was no longer in control of my own existence. They left me there for 14 hours. No one came. No one explained. I asked the guard outside my cell, a young stormtrooper whose designation I never learned, what was happening, and he did not respond. He stood at attention, helmet facing forward, his white armor gleaming under the harsh lights, and I might as well have been speaking to a bulkhead. I asked for food. Silence. I asked for water. Silence. I asked for access to a communications terminal so I could contact my commanding officer, and the silence that answered me was so complete that I began to wonder if I had spoken aloud at all. Time becomes elastic when you have nothing to measure it by. The lights never dimmed. The temperature never changed. I had no chrono, no datapad, no viewport to show me the stars. I paced my cell, 7 steps corner to corner if I walked diagonally, and tried to reconstruct my recent activities, searching for anything that might have drawn ISB attention. I had processed 17,000 communications in the past month. Routing encrypted transmissions, managing secure channels, handling the endless flow of data that kept the Imperial Navy functioning. Had I mishandled something classified? Had I inadvertently exposed some sensitive information? I could not think of anything. My record was exemplary. My loyalty was absolute. I had reported 2 colleagues for suspected rebel sympathies in my first year of service, and both had been quietly reassigned to labor battalions in the Outer Rim. I was a true believer. I was exactly what the Empire wanted its officers to be. And yet, I was here. The first interrogation session began at what I estimated to be 0900 the following morning, though I had no way to confirm this. The same 2 agents who had collected me from my quarters appeared outside my cell. And the taller one, I had begun to think of him as Scar, though he never gave me his name, gestured for me to follow. We walked through corridors that I did not recognize, deeper into the ship than I had ever been, until we reached a room that looked like a standard briefing chamber, but felt like something else entirely. The walls were bare gray. The table was bolted to the floor. There were 2 chairs on one side and 1 chair on the other, and the proportions of the space were subtly wrong in a way that made me feel off balance, vulnerable, exposed. They sat me in the single chair and remained standing. "We're going to ask you some questions," Scar said. You are going to answer them truthfully. Your answers will be verified against available evidence. Discrepancies will be noted. Do you understand? I understand, I said, though I did not. Not really. But I would like to know what this is about. I've served the Empire loyally for 6 years. My record... Your record is why we're talking instead of processing you directly. The shorter agent, I had begun to think of him as stylish because of the way he held his datapad, made another notation. I watched his hand move and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Processing me for what? I asked. Neither of them answered. Instead, Scar began asking questions. The questions started simply: name, rank, assignment, service history, academy graduation date. I answered automatically, reciting information that any superior officer could have pulled from my personnel file. And I wondered why they were bothering with formalities when they surely already knew everything about me. Then the questions began to shift, growing more specific, more probing, and I felt the first real stirrings of fear. On the 17th of this month, you processed a transmission from Imperial Center to Outer Rim Sector Command, Scar said. Encryption Protocol 77 Alpha. Do you recall this transmission? I process dozens of transmissions daily, I said. I would need to check my logs to... You cannot check your logs. You are in custody. Answer the question. I don't recall the specific transmission. Protocol 77 Alpha is standard for command-level communications. I process them routinely. Stylus made a notation. Did you make a copy of this transmission? No. Copying classified transmissions without authorization is a violation of Naval Code 37, Section. Did you share the contents of this transmission with anyone outside of authorized channels? No, absolutely not. I would never... Do you have any contacts within known rebel networks? The question hit me like a physical blow. I stared at Scar, certain that I had misheard him, certain that this was some kind of test, some elaborate loyalty assessment that I simply needed to pass. No, I said. I have no contacts within rebel networks. I despise the rebellion. They are terrorists and traitors to the legitimate government of the galaxy. I have actively reported suspected sympathizers among my colleagues. My loyalty to the Empire is absolute. Your loyalty, Scar said, and something in his voice made the word sound like an accusation, is not in question. But it was. I knew it was. The fact that I was sitting in this room, answering these questions, meant that my loyalty was very much in question. Somewhere in the vast, bureaucratic machinery of the Imperial Security Bureau, someone had looked at my file, my communications logs, my associations, my life, and had seen something that warranted investigation. Something that had transformed me from Lieutenant Cassius Morn, loyal officer due for promotion, into Subject 7749 Alrec, potential threat to Imperial security. I did not know what that something was. I would spend the next 3 weeks trying to find out. The interrogations followed a pattern that I eventually learned to recognize, though recognizing it did not make it any easier to endure. They would question me for hours about seemingly random topics. A casual conversation with a colleague in the mess hall. A leave request I had submitted 6 months earlier. A personal letter I had sent to my sister on Chandrila discussing our mother's declining health. They would press for details, demand clarification, circle back to the same subjects again and again until I could no longer remember what I had actually said versus what I had said in previous interrogation sessions. They were looking for inconsistencies. They were looking for lies. They were looking for the moment when I would crack and confess to whatever crime they believed I had committed. The problem was that I had not committed any crime. I told them this repeatedly. I insisted upon it. I begged them to check my records, to interview my colleagues, to examine every transmission I had ever processed, because I knew, I was certain, that any fair investigation would exonerate me completely. My certainty lasted approximately 9 days. On the 9th day, Stylus showed me a document. It was a communication log, formatted in the standard imperial style, bearing my authentication codes and my digital signature. According to this log, I had routed a classified transmission to an unauthorized recipient on the 17th, the same transmission they had asked me about in my first interrogation. The recipient's address was scrambled, untraceable, but the routing signature was mine. The authentication codes were mine. The timestamp matched a period when I had been on duty, alone in the communication center, with no witnesses to confirm or deny my activities. "I did not send this," I said, staring at the document. "This is a fabrication. Someone has falsified my authentication codes." "Authentication codes cannot be falsified," Stylus said. "They are biometrically linked to the individual officer." "Then someone has made an error. The system has malfunctioned. I did not send this transmission. I would never. The document is genuine. It has been verified by 3 independent analysis teams." "Then the analysis teams are wrong. I am telling you the truth. I did not." "Lieutenant Morn." Scar's voice cut through my protests like a vibroblade. "Do you understand what happens to officers who transmit classified intelligence to unauthorized recipients?" I understood. Everyone understood. Treason charges, military tribunal, execution. The Empire did not tolerate disloyalty. The Empire did not forgive betrayal. The Empire destroyed those who threatened it, utterly and completely, and it did so with the same cold efficiency that characterized every aspect of its operations. I had watched it happen to others. Officers who had made mistakes, who had questioned orders, who had shown insufficient enthusiasm for the imperial cause. They had disappeared into the system and never returned. Their names erased from personnel files, their existence forgotten, their fates unspoken. I was looking at that same fate now. "I am not a traitor," I said. My voice sounded strange to my ears, thin and desperate, the voice of a man who knows he will not be believed. "I have served the Empire faithfully. I have sacrificed everything for the Empire. I left my home, my family, my entire life to serve. I would never betray that service. Never." Scar studied me for a long moment. His eyes revealed nothing. "We will verify your claims," he said finally. "The investigation will continue." The investigation continued for another 12 days. During that time, I was transferred from the adjudicator to an ISB facility that I was never told the name of, on a planet that I was never told the location of. I was processed, that word again, so clinical, so dehumanizing, through a series of holding cells, each one slightly smaller and slightly colder than the last. I was photographed, fingerprinted, retinal scanned, blood typed, and subjected to a medical examination so thorough that I felt violated by it. I was given a gray jumpsuit to replace my uniform and a number to replace my name. I was 7749 Aurek. I was a file. I was a problem to be solved. The facility itself was a labyrinth of identical corridors and identical doors, designed to disorient, to confuse, to break down any sense of individual identity. There were no viewports. There were no chronos. The lights were always at the same painful brightness, and the temperature was always the same uncomfortable cold. I saw other prisoners occasionally, shuffling past in their gray jumpsuits, their faces blank with the particular emptiness of those who have been institutionalized. But we were not permitted to speak. We were not permitted to make eye contact. We were not permitted to acknowledge each other's existence at all. Because acknowledgement implied connection, and connection was dangerous in a place like this. The interrogations grew more intense. They brought in specialists, men and women whose faces I never saw clearly, who asked questions from the shadows while droids circulated around me, monitoring my vital signs, analyzing my micro-expressions, measuring the dilation of my pupils and the conductivity of my skin. They asked me about my childhood. They asked me about my academy training. They asked me about my political beliefs, my personal relationships, my sexual history, my dreams. They asked me questions that had no apparent connection to the alleged crime, questions that seemed designed purely to humiliate, to destabilize, to remind me that I had no privacy anymore, that every aspect of my existence was subject to imperial scrutiny. I answered everything. I had no choice. The droids detected lies, or what the specialists interpreted as lies, and every detected falsehood resulted in consequences. Sometimes the consequences were physical. A shock administered through the metal chair I was bound to, calibrated to cause maximum pain without permanent damage. Sometimes the consequences were psychological. An extension of my isolation, a reduction in my food rations, a subtle change in the lighting that made it impossible to sleep. They were training me like an animal, conditioning me to associate truthfulness with relief and concealment with suffering. But I had nothing to conceal. I told them the truth, the same truth, over and over, and they did not believe me. Or perhaps they did believe me and simply did not care. I began to understand that the truth was irrelevant in this place. The ISB did not concern itself with guilt or innocence in any meaningful sense. The ISB concerned itself with threats, and I had been designated a threat, and that designation was its own reality. It did not matter whether I had actually transmitted classified information to rebel networks. It mattered that someone believed I might have. It mattered that my file contained a document that suggested wrongdoing. It mattered that I was here, in this facility, wearing this number, answering these questions. My guilt had been established by the fact of my investigation. My investigation had been justified by my guilt. The logic was circular, inescapable, perfect in its horror. On the 15th day, they brought in the interrogation droid. I had seen ITO units before, from a distance, floating through the corridors of Imperial installations like black spheres of malevolent intent. I had heard stories about what they could do, the chemical injections, the neural probes, the sensory overload protocols. But I had always believed those stories were exaggerated, propaganda spread by rebel sympathizers to discredit the legitimate security operations of the Empire. I had been wrong. The stories were not exaggerated. If anything, they were understated. The droid entered my interrogation chamber without warning, gliding through the door on its repulsors, its various appendages folded against its spherical body like the legs of a sleeping insect. It made no sound beyond a faint electronic hum, but its presence filled the room with a weight of anticipation that made it difficult to breathe. I watched it position itself beside the specialist who had been questioning me, a thin woman with gray hair and glasses that caught the light in ways that obscured her eyes. And I felt my bladder threaten to release. "Subject 7M49 Aurek," the woman said. "You have continued to deny involvement in the unauthorized transmission of classified intelligence. Standard interrogation methods have failed to produce a confession. We are now authorized to proceed with enhanced techniques." "I have nothing to confess," I said. My voice was shaking. My entire body was shaking. Please, I'm telling you the truth. I did not send that transmission. I would never. The droid will now administer the first protocol. I do not wish to describe what happened next. I do not wish to describe the way the droid's appendages unfolded, revealing needles and probes and devices whose purposes I could not identify. I do not wish to describe the sound I made when the first injection entered my bloodstream. A sound that did not seem human, that seemed to come from somewhere outside of myself, from some primal place where language had not yet been invented. I do not wish to describe the visions that followed, the way reality fractured into shards of light and pain and terror, the way I saw my own memories twisted and distorted until I could no longer distinguish between what had happened and what the drugs made me believe had happened. I do not wish to describe any of it, but I will, because this is my confession. This is my testament. This is the only record that will remain of what the Empire did to me, and I owe it to myself, to the person I was before, to speak the truth. The enhanced interrogation lasted 6 hours. When it was over, I had confessed to crimes I had not committed. I had signed documents admitting to treason, sedition, communication with enemy forces, and conspiracy to undermine imperial authority. I had provided names. Names of colleagues I had barely spoken to. Names of friends I had not seen in years. Names I was not even sure were real, as co-conspirators in a plot that existed only in the chemical hallucinations induced by the droid's protocols. I had betrayed everything I believed in, everything I had served, everything I had been, because the pain was too much and the drugs were too strong, and I wanted it to stop. I wanted it to stop. And then it did stop, but it did not end. They cleaned me up. They gave me water and food, the first real food I had eaten in days. And they allowed me to sleep for a few hours in a cell that was slightly warmer, slightly darker, slightly more humane than the ones I had occupied before. When I woke, Scar was waiting outside my door. "Your cooperation is appreciated," he said. "The investigation has concluded." "What happens now?" I asked. My voice was hoarse. My throat felt like it had been scraped raw from the inside. My memories of the past 6 hours were fragmentary, scattered. But I remembered enough to know that I had confessed. I remembered enough to know that I had damned myself. Now we processed the findings. I expected execution. I expected a tribunal. I expected to be taken to some gray chamber and shot in the back of the head, my body disposed of, my existence erased from the Imperial record. I had seen the execution reports that crossed my communication station, terse, clinical documents noting the termination of personnel deemed threats to Imperial security. And I assumed that I would become one of those reports, another number, another line in a file that no one would ever read. Instead, they took me to an office. The office was small, windowless, furnished with a single desk and 2 chairs. A man sat behind the desk, wearing the uniform of an ISB colonel. His face round and unremarkable, the kind of face you would forget immediately after seeing it. He had a datapad in front of him, and he was reading from it when I was escorted in, his eyes moving across the screen with the bored efficiency of someone performing a routine task. "Subject 749 Aurek," he said, not looking up. "Cassius Morn, Lieutenant, Imperial Naval. Communications. Flagged for investigation following anomalous transmission patterns. Investigation concluded. Threat assessment, low to moderate. Recommended disposition, reprocessing." I did not know what reprocessing meant, but the word filled me with a dread that was different from the fear I had felt during interrogation. Interrogation was immediate. visceral, a horror you could understand on an animal level. This was something else. This was bureaucratic, procedural, a horror wrapped in the language of forms and protocols and standard operating procedures. "What does that mean?" I asked. "Reprocessing?" The colonel looked up for the first time. His eyes were brown, ordinary, empty of any recognizable emotion. "It means that you have been deemed a manageable risk," he said. "Your confession will be filed but not acted upon. You will not face tribunal. You will not be executed. Instead, you will be reassigned." "Reassigned where?" "That is not your concern. Your identity will be restructured to eliminate security vulnerabilities. Your previous service record will be sealed. Your previous contacts will be informed that you died in a training accident." He paused, making a notation on his datapad. "You will be given a new name, a new rank, a new assignment. You will serve the Empire in a capacity appropriate to your revised threat assessment. You will not discuss your previous life with anyone. You will not attempt to contact anyone from your previous life. You will not exist as Cassius Morn ever again." I stared at him. You're erasing me," I said. "We are protecting the Empire," he said. "Your previous identity has been compromised. Whether that compromise was the result of your own actions or external manipulation is no longer relevant. The identity itself has become a security risk. The identity must be eliminated. You may continue to exist in a different form, provided you demonstrate continued loyalty and compliance." "And if I refuse?" The colonel's expression did not change, but something in the room shifted. The temperature seemed to drop. The shadows seemed to deepen. The hum of the ventilation system seemed to grow louder, more insistent, as though the building itself was leaning in to hear my answer. "There is no refusal," he said. "There is only compliance or non-compliance. Compliance leads to reprocessing. Non-compliance leads to termination. These are the only options available to you. The choice is yours, but the choice is not really a choice at all." He was right. The choice was not a choice. I complied. The reprocessing took 3 weeks. During that time, I was held in a facility that might have been on Coruscant or might have been on the other side of the galaxy. I was never told, and the interior was designed to reveal nothing about the exterior location. I was given psychological reconditioning sessions, hours of holovid programming that repeated Imperial slogans and doctrine until they seemed to echo inside my skull even when the programs were not playing. I was given a new history, memorized through repetition and reinforcement, a complete biography of a man who had never existed, but who I was now required to become. My new name was Veth Torn. My new rank was Ensign. My new assignment was sanitation oversight aboard a supply depot in the Outer Rim, a position so far removed from my previous expertise that it seemed almost comical. I had been a communications officer, trusted with sensitive intelligence, destined for command. Now I would be supervising waste disposal on a station that serviced agricultural freighters. The demotion was not explicitly phrased as punishment, but its meaning was clear. I had been neutralized. I had been reduced. I had been placed somewhere that I could do no harm, where my potential threat to Imperial security would be contained by the sheer insignificance of my new role. I accepted all of it. I had no alternative. The transport that took me to my new assignment was a bulk freighter carrying industrial equipment to the Outer Rim. I shared a cargo hold with 30 other passengers, all of us strapped into seats along the walls, none of us speaking. Some of them wore the gray jumpsuits of processed individuals. Others wore civilian clothes that looked new and ill-fitting, as though they had been purchased hastily to replace confiscated wardrobes. I looked at their faces and wondered how many of them had stories like mine. How many of them had been loyal servants of the Empire before someone, somewhere, had decided that their loyalty was suspect? I did not ask. Asking was dangerous. The journey took 4 days. When we arrived at the station, a rotating cylinder of Durasteel and ferrocrete called Depot 17 Besh, I was processed through arrival procedures, given my assignment details, and shown to my quarters. The quarters were a slight improvement over my detention cell. A small room with a bunk, a desk, a viewport showing the stars, and a refresher with a door that actually closed. I stood at the viewport for a long time that first night, watching the slow rotation of the galaxy outside, trying to find some constellation that I recognized, some star that might orient me in the vastness of space. I found nothing. I was nowhere. I was no one. The work at Depot 17 Besh was exactly as meaningless as its description suggested. I supervised sanitation droids. I filed maintenance reports. I attended mandatory briefings where supervisors discussed waste disposal metrics and recycling efficiency ratings. I ate bland rations in a mess hall filled with workers who looked as empty and defeated as I felt. And I returned to my quarters each night to stare at the viewport and wonder what had happened to my life. The other workers avoided me. They did not know my history. My new identity was a carefully constructed fiction that revealed nothing of my past. But they sensed something wrong about me, some fundamental brokenness that marked me as different. I had been reprocessed. I had been taken apart by the ISB and put back together in a new configuration, and the seams showed. The scars showed. The absence of the person I had been showed in my eyes, in my posture, in the way I flinched when someone spoke loudly or moved suddenly. I had become a ghost haunting my own existence. 6 months passed, then a year, then 2 years. I performed my duties. I filed my reports. I attended my briefings. I did everything that was required of me and nothing more. Because initiative was dangerous, ambition was dangerous, anything that might draw attention to myself was dangerous. I had learned what happened when the Empire noticed you. I had learned what happened when someone, somewhere, decided that you were a threat. I had no intention of being noticed again. But the Empire noticed everything. It was in my 3rd year at Depot 17 Besh that I made the mistake of helping a co-worker. Her name was Lyra Venn, and she worked in the accounting division, processing supply manifests and requisition forms. She was young, perhaps 23, only a few years younger than I had been when I joined the Navy. With dark hair and a nervous habit of biting her lower lip when she was concentrating. She had spoken to me exactly once before the incident. A brief exchange in the mess hall where she had asked if the seat beside me was taken. I had said no. She had sat down. We had eaten in silence. That was the extent of our relationship. Then she came to me with a problem. "I found a discrepancy," she said. She was standing in the doorway of my office, a generous term for the closet-sized space where I filed my sanitation reports. And her face was pale with a fear that I recognized intimately. In the manifests, someone's been diverting supplies, medical equipment, rations, fuel cells, small amounts. But it's been going on for months, maybe years. I should have told her to leave. I should have told her to report the discrepancy to her supervisors and forget she had ever mentioned it to me. I should have remembered what had happened the last time I had done the right thing, the last time I had trusted in the Empire's systems to function fairly and justly. Instead, I listened. "Who's doing it?" I asked. "I don't know. The transactions are hidden, routed through dummy accounts. But the authorization codes..." She hesitated, her lip caught between her teeth. "The authorization codes belong to Sector Comptroller Bryn. He's the one signing off on the transfers." Sector Comptroller Bryn, I knew the name. Everyone at the depot knew the name. Bryn was the highest-ranking Imperial official in our sector, a man with connections to the Moffs and influence that extended far beyond his nominal authority. He was also rumored to be ISB connected, a silent partner in the security apparatus that kept the Outer Rim under Imperial control. "Don't report it," I said, immediately. "Don't tell anyone. Forget you saw it. But it's theft, it's corruption, it's nothing that concerns you. Delete the files. Pretend the discrepancy never existed. Trust me on this." She looked at me with an expression that I could not read. Confusion, perhaps. Disappointment. The particular betrayal of someone who had expected better from a fellow human being. "You sound like you've been through this before," she said. I did not answer. She left my office, and I assumed that would be the end of it. I assumed she would take my advice, delete the evidence, and protect herself from the consequences of noticing something she should not have noticed. I was wrong. 3 days later, Lyra Venn was arrested by ISB agents and taken from the depot in restraints. I watched it happen from across the docking bay, standing frozen in the shadow of a cargo container, my heart pounding with a terror that had become unfortunately familiar. The agents were efficient, professional, utterly routine in their brutality. They seized her arms, forced her onto a transport, and departed without explanation. The other workers in the bay looked away, pretending they had seen nothing, and within minutes, it was as though she had never existed at all. I went back to my quarters and did not sleep for 3 days. The fear was not irrational. The fear was perfectly, horribly rational. Lyra Venn had come to me with her discrepancy. She had asked for my help. If she had mentioned my name during her interrogation, if the ISB's psychological techniques had extracted my involvement in any form, then I would be next. I would be taken again, processed again, subjected to the same procedures that had stripped me of my identity 3 years before. And this time, there would be no reprocessing. This time, there would only be termination. I considered running. I considered finding a smuggler, buying passage to some uncharted system beyond Imperial reach, disappearing into the vastness of the galaxy where even the ISB could not find me. But I knew that such thoughts were fantasy. There was no escaping the Empire. There was no place beyond its reach. The Emperor's eyes were everywhere, in the surveillance systems, in the informant networks, in the very fabric of galactic civilization. Running would only confirm my guilt. Running would only accelerate my destruction. So I waited. I waited for 3 weeks, and nothing happened. No agents came to my quarters. No supervisors called me in for questioning. My routine continued unchanged. Sanitation reports, maintenance briefings, bland rations, sleepless nights. It was as though Lyra Venn's arrest had been completely unconnected to our conversation, as though she had kept my name out of her interrogation, as though I had somehow escaped notice once again. But I did not feel relieved. I felt the opposite of relief. I felt watched. It started with small things. A flicker of movement in my peripheral vision that disappeared when I turned to look. A sense of presence in my quarters when I returned from work, as though someone had been there in my absence and had left behind only the faintest trace of their intrusion. A recurring dream in which I walked through endless gray corridors, following the sound of footsteps that were always just ahead of me, never catching up, never arriving. Then the messages began. The first one appeared on my datapad during a routine sanitation briefing. A single line of text embedded in what looked like a standard maintenance notification. "We know who you were." I stared at the message for so long that my supervisor had to repeat my name 3 times before I heard him. When I looked up, the room seemed brighter, sharper, every detail etched with painful clarity. The faces of my co-workers, the imperial insignia on the wall, the hum of the station's life support systems, keeping us alive in the void, keeping us trapped in our regulated existence. I deleted the message. It appeared again the next day, embedded in a different notification. We know what they did to you. And the day after that, we can help you remember. I did not respond. I did not know who was sending the messages or what they wanted. I did not know if this was an ISB trap, a loyalty test, an attempt to provoke me into action that would confirm whatever suspicions still lingered in my file. I did not know anything except that I was afraid. More afraid than I had been since the interrogation, since the droid, since the moment when I had signed my own confession and surrendered every truth I had ever held. The messages continued for 2 weeks. Then they stopped. Then the dreams changed. In my new dreams, I was not walking through corridors. I was standing on the bridge of a star destroyer, looking out at a planet that I did not recognize. The planet was burning. Cities were collapsing, ships were exploding in orbit. And somewhere behind me, I could hear breathing. Mechanical, rhythmic, terrible, growing louder with every passing second. I would wake from these dreams, drenched in sweat, my heart racing, my mind filled with images that felt more like memories than fantasies. I began to wonder if the ISB's psychological reconditioning had included implanted suggestions, false memories designed to destabilize me at some predetermined future moment. I began to wonder if I was losing my mind. Perhaps I was. Perhaps I am. This confession is being recorded on a personal data pad that I have kept hidden from station security for the past 6 months. I do not know if anyone will ever read it. I do not know if I will be alive when it is found. I only know that I needed to write down what happened, to preserve some record of the person I was before the Empire unmade me. My name was Cassius Morn. I was a lieutenant in the Imperial Navy. I was loyal. I was dedicated. I believed in the order that the Empire promised, in the stability that it offered, in the necessity of its sometimes harsh methods. I did not question. I did not doubt. I served. And then someone, somewhere, decided that I was a threat. I still do not know why. I still do not know what triggered the investigation, what anomaly in my transmission patterns drew ISB attention, what unknown enemy chose to forge that document with my authentication codes. I have spent years trying to reconstruct the chain of events, trying to identify the moment when my fate was sealed. And I have found nothing. The answer may not exist. The answer may be that there was no reason, that I was selected arbitrarily, that my destruction was simply the random operation of a machine too vast and too complex to operate with any coherent purpose. This is the truth about the Empire, that they do not teach in the academies, that they do not broadcast on the holonet, that they do not acknowledge in any official document or public statement. The Empire is not a government. The Empire is not even an organization. The Empire is a mechanism, a blind churning mechanism designed to produce control and reproduce itself, indifferent to the individual components that it consumes in the process. The ISB does not protect the Empire from threats. The ISB is the Empire in its purest and most distilled form. It exists to perpetuate fear, to demonstrate power, to remind every citizen that they exist at the sufferance of forces beyond their comprehension. When the ISB labels you a threat, you become a threat. The designation creates its own reality. The bureaucracy processes you through its systems, and you emerge on the other side transformed, guilty, broken, unrecognizable even to yourself. It does not matter what you did or did not do. It does not matter what you believe or do not believe. It only matters that you have been labeled, and once labeled, you can never be unlabeled again. I understand this now. I did not understand it before. When I was Cassius Morn, when I believed in the system, when I trusted that loyalty would protect me. I understand it now as Veth Torn, as a ghost, as a man who died in a training accident 3 years ago and has been walking through the afterlife ever since. The messages have started again. They appeared on my datapad this morning, embedded in a routine supply manifest. You are not alone. When you are ready, respond. We have been waiting for you. I do not know who is sending them. I do not know what they want. I suspect they are rebels, agents of the Alliance to restore the Republic, operating covertly within Imperial space, recruiting assets from among the Empire's own victims. The ISB would call them terrorists. The ISB would call me a traitor for even reading their communications, for even considering their offer. But the ISB already called me a traitor once, and I was innocent then. Perhaps, if I am to be damned anyway, I should earn the damnation. Perhaps, if the Empire has already decided what I am, I should become what it has made me. Or perhaps this is another trap. Perhaps the ISB is testing me, probing for the final proof of disloyalty that will justify my termination. Perhaps I am being watched right now as I write these words, as I contemplate responses that would seal my fate forever. I do not know. I do not know anything anymore. All I know is what happens when the ISB labels you a threat. They take you. They break you. They remake you into something that serves their purposes. And then they release you back into the galaxy, damaged and diminished, a walking reminder to everyone who sees you that no one is safe, that loyalty is no protection, that the Empire will consume you if it chooses to, regardless of your service, regardless of your devotion, regardless of every sacrifice you have ever made. I was Cassius Morn. I was a loyal servant of the Empire. Now I am nothing. Now I am Veth Torn, sanitation overseer, ghost, dead man walking through the cold corridors of Depot 17 Besh. I file my reports, I attend my briefings, I eat my rations and return to my quarters and stare at the viewport, watching the slow rotation of stars that no longer seem to have anything to do with me. And I wait. I wait for the next message. I wait for the ISB agents to come for me again. I wait for something to happen that will give my existence meaning. Even if that meaning is only suffering, only termination, only the final acknowledgement that I was here, that I mattered, that I was more than a number in a file. Subject 7749 AUREC. Threat assessment, manageable. Disposition, reprocessed. Status, contained. That is what my file says. That is what I have become in the Empire's records. But somewhere inside me, buried beneath years of conditioning and fear and careful compliance, there is still a spark of the person I used to be. There is still a whisper of Cassius Morn, the young officer who believed in duty and order and the rightness of Imperial rule. He is wounded. He is diminished. He may be dying. But he is not dead yet. The messages on my datapad glow faintly in the darkness of my quarters. The offer hangs in the air like the promise of rain on a parched world. I could respond. I could take the step that cannot be untaken, the step that will transform me from managed threat to active enemy, from processed asset to genuine rebel. Or I could delete the messages and continue as I have been, serving out my sentence in obscurity, waiting for the Empire to finish what it started. The choice is mine. choice is not really a choice at all. I reach for the datapad. My hand is trembling. The ghosts of everyone I used to be. The academy cadet, the loyal lieutenant, the man who reported his colleagues without hesitation, gather around me in the darkness, watching, judging, waiting to see what I will do. I press my thumb to the screen. I begin to type. This is my confession. This is my testament. This is the only record that will remain of what was done to me and what I became because of it. If you are reading this, then I am probably dead. If you are reading this, then the ISB has probably found me, probably processed me for the final time, probably erased every trace of my existence from the galaxy. But words are harder to erase than people. Words survive. Remember me. Remember what the Empire does to those it labels threats. Remember that loyalty is no protection, that innocence is no defense, that the machine will consume you if it chooses to, regardless of everything you have done or believed or sacrificed. Remember, and if you can, resist. The Empire is vast, but it is not eternal. The Emperor is powerful, but he is not a god. The ISB is terrifying, but it is not omniscient. There are cracks in the armor. There are weaknesses in the system. There are people even now who refuse to accept the galaxy as it has been given to them. I do not know if I will live long enough to join them. I do not know if my response to those messages will lead to freedom or to destruction. I only know that I am tired of being afraid. I am tired of being managed. I am tired of existing as Subject 7749 ALREC, threat assessment manageable, disposition reprocessed, status contained. I was Cassius Morn. I will be Cassius Morn again, even if only for a moment. And when the Empire comes for me, when the ISB agents appear at my door, when the interrogation droids unfold their instruments, when the Colonel reads my final disposition from his datapad, I will not look away. I will not flinch. I will meet their eyes, and I will remember who I was. And I will take that memory with me into whatever darkness waits beyond. That is my rebellion. That is my resistance. That is all I have left to give. The message is sent. The die is cast. The clock is ticking down toward whatever end awaits me. I set the datapad aside and walk to the viewport. The stars turn slowly in the infinite black, and for the first time in years, they seem beautiful to me. They seem like possibilities rather than prison bars. They seem like hope. The Empire took everything from me. My name, my rank, my identity, my faith in the systems I served. But it could not take this moment. It could not take the satisfaction of knowing that I chose, in the end, to be more than what they made me. It could not take my final, small, probably futile act of defiance. I am Cassius Morn. I remember. I resist. Whatever happens next, let the record show that I did not go quietly. Let the record show that the Empire broke me, but it did not destroy me completely. Let the record show that even in the darkest corners of the galaxy, even in the most hopeless circumstances, even in the belly of the beast itself, there are still those who refuse to surrender their humanity. The lights flicker. Someone is coming. I can hear footsteps in the corridor, measured, deliberate, the footsteps of people who know exactly where they are going and why. I do not have much time, but I have enough time to finish this. I have enough time to save this file, to hide this datapad in the compartment I prepared months ago, to ensure that my words survive even if I do not. I have enough time to become, in this small way, something more than what the ISB wanted me to be. The footsteps are closer now. The door chime sounds. I close my eyes. I take a breath. I think of everyone who believed in me, My family, my instructors, the officers who recommended me for promotion on that morning that feels like 1,000 years ago. And I let them go. I think of everyone I failed. Lyra Venn, the colleagues I reported in my first year of service, the person I could have been if I had questioned sooner, resisted earlier, seen the truth before it was too late. And I let them go too. I am empty now. I am clear. I am ready. The door opens. They are here.